Hi, so for those of you that don't know me, I'm Catherine McGuire. I'm the Director of Education here. And the dog next to me is named Lebowski, and she will be with us for the remainder of the evening and will be wonderful. She did just give one bark, but normally they're very minimal, I promise. So thank you for coming out for this event. I know in the summer there are so many things and places you can be, so we appreciate you picking this for your evening activity for this wonderful night. I'm gonna go through just some logistics, but really the bulk of this evening is gonna be listening to these individuals, and my voice will be at a minimum. I would love to do a sound check from friends. Do we feel like it's a good volume? Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Appreciate it. So there are restrooms on this floor should you need them. There are two of them. Fun fact, you have to push kind of hard before you have to lock it. It's a little troublesome there. We've got recycling out for your beers or your LaCroix. And if at any point you want to get another drink, there is going to be a staff member that will be out there that will gladly take your $5. Let's see, we want to thank everyone in the audience, in particular that's a donor or a member. You guys are so important to us as we continue to offer these programs, not only in a beautiful space, but also for free. And we want to continue to do that. So should you enjoy this program, we encourage you to potentially become a member if you're not one already. There are pamphlets and information should that be something you're interested in. And we are going to share some microphones amongst this group. I'm going to let them actually introduce themselves here in a moment. And we also have some audio visual components. So we've got on our screen some photos, as well as on that wall, we've got some different artifacts. Those are wonderful things that Jared has brought that you're welcome to look at. Books you can touch, other pieces, please don't. And don't walk off with anything, but we're so glad to share them with you. And if for any reason you haven't seen the main gallery downstairs, we do have a little box that is about the Muries that we have some of the Murie artifacts in. And then we've got a wonderful, beautiful big quote that's on one of the walls downstairs that just is an homage to them and to the wonderful place that they loved and have helped protect for us to love as well. So I'm gonna sit as I ask questions. I think that's okay, right, Marlon? Okay. Okay, so this is a classic question. We start this way always, and the question is to just introduce yourself. And as you do that, rather than thinking of like what qualifications you have, you can just think about when and why did you move to Jackson and why is this place your home? Or in the case of some of our friends, summer home or place for a vacation. So why do you pick this place and who are you?
Hi, I'm Nancy Shea, and Jack Shea and I came here in '88 to run Teton Science School. So that's how we got here. It was really for work, you know. I'm a Westerner. He was from Massachusetts, but you know, then we just dug in, and so I've been here 36 years. So it's kind of like once you get here, you really can't leave. And so, my sort of career here was starting the grad program at Teton Science School, ran that for a while. And then when the Grand Teton came to the science school and said, we need to figure out what we're going to do with Marty's place, because she had gotten the Presidential Medal of Freedom. They couldn't just ignore it. And so I switched hats, and I went over and started the Murie Center. That was a long time ago. That was 1997, and ran it for 7 years and got to be with Marty. She was still on the ranch. Kurt was still on the ranch, it was a glorious time, I would say, to be at the Murie Center. And so then after that, you know, I've been teaching for some universities and doing some consulting and that kind of thing. So, but to your question, I love this place. You know, this is my home. It will be my home forever. My daughter, Hayden Shea, grew up here. And, you know, so once your kid grows up here, right, you just feel so attached. So I'm looking around the audience and I'm thinking, there's a lot of people out there should be on this panel. A lot of people should be on this panel, but welcome and thank you for coming. And I'm sure I'll have more to offer.
Hello, my name is Janet Cook and I'm one of the docents at the Murie Ranch. We give tours. Okay, I'm Janet Cook and I'm from South Carolina. And we are the docents at the Murie Ranch. We give tours every day.
Hi, I'm the other half. I'm Carmie Cook, and you can obviously tell from our accent that we are not from here. We're from South Carolina. And we actually leave in the morning to go back to South Carolina after having been here all summer. It has been a delightful summer. And I can't think of a better way for us to spend our last night here than be with you in this beautiful area. A little bit about how we ended up here starts a long time ago. When Janet and I were first married, I was in the Air Force. And we spent the first 3 years of our marriage at Elmendorf Air Force Base in Alaska. And one summer while we were there, our moms came up to visit us. And as we were in downtown Anchorage one day, Janet's mom wanted to read something about Alaska. So she picked up a book in a bookstore. And when she got ready to leave, she handed it to me and she said, "Here, you need to read this." And it was Two in the Far North. And so it has been a education for us since 1972 on the Muries. And we had the opportunity to come here and be docents at the Murie Ranch. We jumped at it. And it's been a delightful summer. Janet and I have said we've had many wonderful summers. This has got to be one of the best, and we're glad to be here.
My name is, I'm Sam Murin. We're like a three-headed team right here. So we are the trifecta from the Murie Ranch. And I have the privilege of managing our small and mighty team. So I am currently, I suppose, the face from a managerial perspective of Teton Science Schools and what we are collectively doing to steward the mission of the place. I have lived here since 2014. And the reason, it's not a very exciting story, but basically I grew up with somebody who moved out here, dropped out of MSU to be a ski bum. And there was one winter, he told me, "Sam, you have to come out and visit." And we drove about 2,200 miles in 2 days from Vermont. And the first thing that we did when we get here is we climbed up Snow King. And ever since I've fallen in love with this place.
Hey everybody, my name is Evan Griffith and I'm here because I wrote a children's book about Olasa and Marty Murie that was just published called Wild at Heart. Some copies of it in the gift store downstairs if you want to take a look. But I am very, very new to Jackson. This is my second time here. I came out for the first time about a year ago. So I've been spending the week here and having an absolute blast, getting to do some events, but also a lot of hiking. So my connection to this place feels relatively new, but very exciting to me and hopefully growing. Would love to come back out here. I'm based in Austin, Texas, so this is a really wonderful weather change for me. So thank you, happy to be here.
My name is Jared Smith, and I was thinking I might have been conceived here, but the months didn't quite work out. My folks came here in 1945 on their honeymoon during the Second World War, stayed at the Ward Hotel, and then up at Dornan's, and I came along in 1956. So. And that by then they had finished their log cabin, at least most of it, and still were working on the bunk room. And I've been here ever since. And so I spent all my summers here and then school year over in Seattle. And Then, like Sam, I came here to be a ski bum in 1973, and had grown up around the Muries. And Marty kind of, she, I think my folks might have asked her to keep an eye on me. And so anyway, I got my mail there, and she would feed me meals, and then I did odd jobs, including if you take a left as you walk into the main living room, you'll see a magazine rack, and that's something I made for her way back in 1974. It's now part of the historic structure. So I'm feeling kind of old.
Thank you for starting to share that. My personal history here is also connected to TSS. That was my first job here. So the many of you with connections to TSS, I definitely resonate with. And I first came here because a cousin married a local Jackson boy. And so I just love that all of us have been here either once and then couldn't leave, or in my case, or hopefully in Evans, you came once and then you keep coming back. My next question for you folks is, what is your connection to the Muries? When did you first meet them, or when did you first learn about them?
Well, when we came in 88, Marty, excuse me, Marty, Ola's, of course, died in 63. I would have only been 11 years old. So I didn't meet Ola's, but when we came in 88, of course, Marty was on the board of the science school. And so, she was immediately in my atmosphere and took a lot of our students, over to the ranch to have tea and cookies, which she was so famous for. And she was, she kind of blew my mind. She was such an activist and so articulate and spoke so passionately about protecting wild places that, she, in a way, I don't know, but I think in a way, was an important part of me getting so connected to this place and the wildness of this place. So, Marty was more like, mentor. I wouldn't call her pal, but she just had a lot of influence for that. And then, of course, when I started the Murie Center, she was on the ranch and she was aging by that point. So not quite as, as articulate as her old age. I mean, in her younger years. But just anytime I got to spend some time with her, I loved. Oh, and I knew her kids too, because they would come through the ranch. And that was fun. I really loved Martin, with his hair down to his, way down his back, and he'd always wear these overalls, and he was so classic hippie. He was a professor at Yellow Springs, Antioch University. And anyway, he was just your classic wild guy. And so it's like, oh, I guess you got this. Okay.
Well. Can you hear me? Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Well, as Carmie said, this is my mother's fault because she got our curiosity up about the Muries, and we love wilderness and wildlife and just being outdoors and hiking. And so this has been a wonderful summer, and talking about Marty and Olis has been a dream come true. And we've met so many nice people, and I just had the best time ever.
I told a little bit about the story. I think another piece, like I said, we lived in Alaska and we've been back a number of times. And the last time we were there, we specifically went to Abe and Wheezy's cabin, which is on the Savage River. And it is a National Historic landmark, National Historic property. And it was very emotional because by the time we got to see it, we had been able to read all of Olis and Marty's books and now Abe's book. And we were also able to go to what had just recently been opened in, right as you go into Denali National Park, about a mile or two in on your right, there is the Murie Science and Learning Center. So to be able to go in there and appreciate the Muries. It was a lifetime dream.
Guess I'm pretty young, and I moved out here in 2014. And I'll share, before moving out here, I had honestly never heard of the Muries. And I came out here ultimately and became a grad student for the science schools. And actually, I think back about something that Nancy shared with us earlier in the season. And we've had this concert and conversation series up at the Murie Ranch every Tuesday for the past 10 weeks. And we had an author come up there, Katie, and she shared that the Murie Ranch is a thin place. It's where you feel the spirit of a place. And there aren't physical human constructs that prevent you from feeling that spirit. And for me, the first time that I felt the spirit was as a grad student. We actually, we went to the ranch. This was the fall of 2015, I suppose. And we met docent Dan. And I just remember leaving that place just in tears. And didn't realize what the true power of that place was. And ever since then, it has stuck with me. And still feel it every day that we get to go up to the ranch and help steward what we do.
So my connection to the Muries is relatively very recent, but I first came across their story in, I believe it was 2020. And at that point, I had written my first couple of children's books that were to be published, and they were really about connection to the natural world. One of them was a biography of a marine biologist. And I was at a point where I knew that I really wanted to tell a conservation story. And so I was really on the hunt for that. And so when I came across the Murie story, I was initially really intrigued because I was like, there are a lot of elements here that I think could make this a really beautiful and engaging and fun story for young readers. They had so many incredible adventures, but it's also very much a story of fighting for what you believe in, bringing your whole self to the battles that you fight on behalf of nature. But it was really when I picked up some of their own books, when I read Two in the Far North, when I read Journeys to the Far North, that I came to have so much respect for not just their success as conservationists, but also their power as writers. And I was really, really drawn to the way that they use the power of their words to change hearts and minds, and that really, really spoke to me. So I was kind of hooked at that point.
It's a cool book if you haven't seen it yet. And there's copies downstairs?
Yes.
Great. Should I? So a picture might be better. So my sister and I were going through some family archives in the last couple of years, and we stumbled across a lot of memorabilia, some of which is on the table over there from our relationship with the Muries. My folks first got to know the Muries probably in the late 1940s. I don't know exactly what year. My aunt was my mom's identical twin. My mom and dad are named Palmer and Dorothy, but their nicknames that everybody knew about were Snuffy and Dottie. And then my aunt Marjorie was known as Muggy. And they all were here during the summers and got to know Marty and Olis, and we can't forget Aid and Wheezy, Louise and Adolph, who, for those that don't know, Marty and Wheezy are half sisters, and Olis and Aid are half brothers. So it's kind of an interesting relationship. So I'll just skip through here. So there's my mom and dad with Marty. My dad eventually became Marty's personal attorney. So I'm not sure what he's doing there, but they're probably working on reviewing some speech that she was giving. And this is the Murie family as I knew them when I was a kid. So this is two of Marty's kids. In the middle there is Donald, and then Joanne. And then Joanne's son, Banjo or Benjamin, and Pablo, the short kid on the bottom. And then Marty's stepbrother from Seattle. And then Robin and Norm. Norm is with a pipe, married to Joanne. And I think the reason that we kind of had a unique relationship was because Marty's roots were also in Seattle. So each spring and fall, she would come and stay with our family and then go up to the retreat that she had built with her cousin, Newt Thomas, who was a sea captain. And this is the family boat that my mom found some records of Katie Thomas. So her maiden name was Thomas, I believe. I think so. And Newt Thomas was her cousin. And he wanted to build a place up on San Juan Island north of Seattle. So Marty would come and stay with our family in Seattle. And then we would be with her here in the summers. And this is the cabin, very small, beautiful cabin there in the left overlooking Limekiln Point. And for those that aren't familiar with San Juan Island, this is the place in the world to see killer whales. Orcas, one time we saw the JK and L pods all converge where that fishing boat is. And Marty just loved this. And this is where she came to recharge her batteries. She would spend maybe a month in the spring during the mud season and then again in the fall. And then on each end of the trip, she would stay with us in Seattle. And so she would just go on long walks, catch up on reading, knitting. She made these amazing woven rugs out of just scrap fabric. Anyway, this is a picture that Mildred Capron took, and you know, behind every great man is a great woman, and this is a picture of that. But behind every great woman is an amazing woman, and this is Mildred Capron. And not many people know about Mildred, but what happened is when Olis died in 1963, Mildred had been a close friend of both Olis and Marty's, and was a filmmaker and quite successful in her own right. She would travel the nation in her Ford Econoline van called Hebzibah. And I was like, she was my best buddy because she just loved, and I was her AV person at the Jackson Lake Lodge when she would show these films. And Marty and Mildred, when Olis passed, Mildred basically ran the ranch. She was the person that kind of took care of maintenance and helped and gave Marty the space to do the things that she needed to do in continuing what Olis and she and others had started. And there's a lot of folks probably here in the audience that remember these days. And so it culminated in Marty there being handed a pen by Lyndon Johnson. This is September 3rd, 1964. 60 years ago, next Tuesday, the signing of the Wilderness Act. And obviously, if Olis had still been alive, he would have been there. But fast forward, this is another president, years later, and you can see Inger Kurt, who a lot of folks here knew. She lived to be 106. And she lived on the ranch right where the Teton Science School staff live now, and with her husband Bob Kurt. And Bill Clinton was out for a visit, and I remember asking her when I saw this photo, "What were you guys talking about?" And she said, with a twinkle in her eye and kind of a sly smile, "I was getting him to commit that as long as he was in power, nothing would happen to the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge." And he stuck to his word and eventually gave Marty the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1998. And then this is 3 weeks ago, right? Or the last few weeks, isn't it? July 5th. So the Clintons came out, and I think they brought their grandkids too. So there's still a connection that continues. So during the time I knew Marty, my mom and Marty and Mildred traveled to Europe together to visit Marty's roots, visit old relatives. This is just a classic scene of Marty. You know, everybody knows about her serving tea on the porch, crybaby molasses cookies. And this is their sourdough starter that hopefully there's going to be a story on in the paper here soon, making sourdough waffles. And you can see what did she care about even in Wyoming? Look at the map. It's Alaska. And then these are just some personal photos. We were showing her some video of a moose, and she just was really getting into it. And then Inger Kurt and Bob had a pet porcupine, And totally non-PC, but it's a funny photograph to look at. And then later years, you can see Joanne visiting her daughter there on the right on the front porch and her caregiver. And then as time went on, you know, her memory, her short-term memory began to fail, but her long-term memory was amazing. And where it really kicked in, and a lot of people here that knew Marty would know this, that in her later years, the best way to connect would be to come and sing with her. And she knew every song in those books that she had by her piano. And then another secret I learned was, sorry for the poor quality. This is a picture we have on our refrigerator and it's haven't stood the test of time. This bear I got out and it had a little movement where you could put your hand inside and its head would move this way and nod. And Marty looked at it and she began to talk to it. And she said, you know, Bolus gave you to me on my honeymoon. And so I realized that a good way to communicate with Marty in her later years was for me to grab the bear and for her to talk to the bear. And I kind of use the bear as I would ask questions as though I was the bear. And then Marty would say, well, you remember we were on the Sheenjack expedition or going up, you know, to Bettles, Alaska. And she would have these just clear as crisp memories, even though she might not remember my name. But the one constant was that Marty loved kids. And every time that the TSS kids would come out, that was a highlight of her week. And that's why I think she'd be so happy with a children's book in her honor. And speaking of kids, I was just going to show, these are my kids, Esther, Audrey, and Naomi. And this is from 1991, thereabouts. They were doing a science project at school and it was like a science fair. And they had this idea, why don't we do research on how animals survive in Jackson Hole in the winter? And who better to interview than Marty Murie? So this is some excerpts that I just dug up in the last couple of days.
Murie lives. She's an expert on wildlife. She wrote 3 books and her husband is an expert on elks. It's freezing out here. How the ranges going?
Well, the first settlers in here were in 1884, and they were people who raised cattle, cows. And then there was a government arrangement so they could take up so much land, each person could have 160 acres of land. And so they sort of spread themselves over part of the valley, but at the same time, they were interested in the fact that there were so many elk around. And they didn't want to do away with the elk altogether. So after a while, they found that the elk needed some home. And the government came in and took them over and the Congress of the United States established a law that created the elk refuge. They call it a refuge. It's where the animals can be safe. And that's what the National Elk Refuge is. There's a book about all wildlife refuges. See this big thick book?
Mm-hmm.
Those are all wildlife tells about where they are and how you get there and what they do and what the animals are. And look how thick that book is. There's more than 100 and some refuges, but the refuge for the elk is one that people hear more about, I think, because it's sort of interesting out there.
Yes, it's the real name for elk.
That's right.
Well, very generous.
And I think it means, the name means white. Their word "wa" means light colored. And the elk have that light hair on their backs and their rump. And so I think it's the white rumped animal. I think that's right.
Wapiti.
Yes, it's called wapiti. And, but then somebody, I don't know when, a long time ago, started calling them elk. And that's not correct. Do you know why?
Mm-hmm.
Because the animal in Europe that is, we call moose. Their word in Germany and all those countries is elk. It's elk in Norway and it's elk, ELCH in Germany. But anyway, it isn't that animal. The animal that we call moose is the one they call elk, so they got things tangled up. A couple of years ago, National Geographic was doing a film about me, and they wanted a picture of me with the typewriter. I had the typewriter in here in the winter time. And I got all set at the typewriter, and the cameraman was right over there. And the cow moose walked around the end of the other room there, and came right up past the window here where I was at the typewriter, and they got all that in the film. Yes, I've had those folks. I've had moose standing in the middle of a path out here once. My friends, the Highlanders, came up to see me, and they couldn't get out of their car and come in because the witch was standing right in the middle of this path with the snow on each side, you know.
Do they grow lots of fur during the winter?
Oh, see, the moose don't have fur. They have, I don't know what you call that. It's called pelage by the scientists. It's more like hair. But I think, yes, it does grow thicker in the winter time. That's also a reason why the moose and the deer and caribou and all those animals can swim so well, because the hair is hollow. It lifts them up in the water and they can swim. Sure, you knew what he was doing, didn't you? I don't know, once we had a tame coyote, we raised it from the public, and the abandoned or the mother has been killed. And that was the coyote we called Murie, which is a Norwegian bird name. And she got so tame, she was in the house and out of the house and sleeping on the front porch with an Norwegian elkhound dog that we had at that time. Marvelous experience. We had her from the middle of April until middle of December when she disappeared, but you never could go anywhere, hike out the trail of the pond or down to the river or anywhere. Murie was right at your heels always. They're a wonderful animal, I think. And this fall we had more howling and singing by the coyotes than I've ever known. And now we don't hear them at all, and I think it's because the elk that come down the west side of the valley have already gone by and they've followed that elk herd down. The thing about that is that if you start feeding the deer, and one of my best friends out there is doing it, I said, well, you realize, Carl, if you have to keep on clear to the spring. Trouble is, people feed the deer and the deer eat in the habit of coming, and then if people get tired of putting out food or can't afford it or something, then the deer are maybe in trouble. And I think that the fish and game people don't really approve of people feeding animals very much. Because of that, because it's for the haphazard. Might be better for the animals to seek out their own food, which I think they could do. They can't survive up here, they leave us in the fall, obviously. Without some of those beaches around town, there's all sorts of vegetation. I have friends who live way up on top of one of those, and the deer come right up under their window, but they're eating natural food. I think they eat a good deal of sage and rabbit brush.
We lived in Alaska, thank you for helping us with more information.
Well, you're very welcome.
Thank you for it, learning is over. Thank you for the apple cider and the cookies.
Oh, I hope you like it.
I do.
Come again.
Little reminiscence there.
Thank you for sharing some of that. I feel like for those of us who maybe weren't lucky enough to meet her, you really feel that essence. And I love that the connection you made to Evan of she would have loved a children's book about her. My next question that we're going to ask to the group is, what is your favorite memory or your favorite interaction with the Muries? So whether it's a firsthand memory or maybe a story you've heard about them that you think is particularly interesting, what comes to mind?
Gosh, lots. I do remember one, this is kind of just a little, but, it was Marty's birthday. I don't remember what year this was, that we were out on the ranch. And the lightning storm came in and struck one of the trees on the ranch. But it didn't like break into a wildfire or anything, but it cooked the tree. It fell over and cooked the tree. And so those of us who were working on the ranch, we all ran out there and we started eating the tree because it was really soft, you know? And and so of course we went running over to Marty. Marty, you gotta try this tree. So that was a fun story because she thought it was pretty cool too. So I don't know, there were a lot of encounters with Marty and the ranch and you know, I just a little story, I think it's about my own daughter, but it connects to the Muries because at some point when I was starting the Murie Center, I used to take people up to the Sheen Jack, up to where the Muries went to when they were you know, exploring the Arctic the National Arctic, the Arctic Wildlife Refuge. And so we'd go up there and they used to camp at this place called Last Lake. And so we would take people up there. And one time I took my daughter, she was about 10, I think. And we did a hike around Last Lake. And maybe there were 6 of us. And we came around a corner and a big grizz, like we walked into basically into a big grizzly bear and it stood up on its hind legs. But you know, there were 6 of us. We weren't too worried and it dropped down and ran off. But little did I know, but later when my daughter applied to go to college, in her college essay, she wrote about meeting this bear. And she said in the essay, the bear and I looked at each other and I knew my purpose. They went, okay, and that was when you were 10. So anyway, that to me is a Murie influence. I really feel like it was a Murie influence on my own daughter, who did go ahead and now, you know, she's been working on behalf of nature too. So anyway, there's a couple stories.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite things that I read about Marty is her granddaughter, Robin, had a dilemma about 2 situations that she had to decide what she was gonna do. And she was talking to her grandmother, Marty, and Marty said, I'd always choose the adventure. And that has helped me with my grandkids, you know, to just say, go for it, you know, instead of being nervous about it.
Earlier this summer, it was late in the afternoon, about 4:30, we just finished up with a couple of tours. And we had this gentleman walk up on the porch and he sat down on one of the chairs that we had there. And he told us that he was a recipient of one of the porch talks with Marty. And that he was struggling with what he wanted to do in life. And he said, as a result of that conversation with her, he chose to go ahead and be a wildlife biologist. And he had spent his entire career as a wildlife biologist and he had just retired. And he came back and he said, I just want to sit on this porch, if you don't mind, and reminisce about that conversation that I had with her and what it did to me in my life and the impact she had on me. I just want to sit here and remember that. And then I just want to pay my respects, if you don't mind. So we left about 5:30 and he was still sitting on the porch and I will never forget that.
So I tell the story often. I don't have a favorite memory specifically because I never had the opportunity to meet them. But in this story that at least I tell, I think one of the most powerful parts for me is this idea that we all face adversity in life, right? And the real inflection point in the story is 1963 when Olaf passes away. Dies of melanoma, and the way, and I'm probably projecting things, but the way that I tell it is that Marty was stricken with grief, and here's this widow. They did everything together for the past 40 years, and no longer is Olaf's with her, and under the guidance actually of her 3 children, they say, Mom, you need to get away from Moose. You gotta leave the ranch. And so she goes to the Pacific Northwest, to Seattle. Her mom's still alive at the time, and actually spends 6 months with her mom And finally, against, and I say the will of her children, returns to the ranch. I like to think her children were like, Mom, it's time to go. But she ultimately comes back. And I share this because we share this story while we're sitting on the porch of the residence. And the way that we like to tell it is that, as you can imagine, she just has no idea how it's going to feel once she steps into her home. And so she steps onto that porch for those of y'all who have been there, and she puts her hand on that doorknob. And she's just kind of pulsating with angst, right? How is this gonna feel? And she opens it up, and the story that we tell is that place gave her a warm embrace. It gave her a hug. And she knew from that moment on in her life what she had to do in her life. And that was to fight wild places to preserve them for the next generation. And so I think there's so much symbolism there, because just a couple months after that, that's when she's at the signing of the Wilderness Act with Lyndon Johnson. But that's just a favorite part of the story I get to tell.
I also don't have a personal memory to share, but can just quickly share a couple of anecdotes from the two in the far north that have really stuck with me. And I'm sure several of you are already familiar with these, but I think they both kind of speak to, what I perceive as a real reverence for the natural world and a sense of communion with the natural world. In both Ulis and Marty's stories, and in Two in the Far North, Marty writes about her courtship with Ulis, and a moment in which I think they're kind of exploring nature together. An owl begins hooting, and Olas hoots back, and sort of engages in conversation with this owl, and the kind of wonder that Marty experienced in that moment. Anecdote from much later in their lives, their relationship, when they were in, I believe it was somewhere in Alaska, and they were absolutely swarmed with mosquitoes. And Marty notes that Olas refused to swat a single mosquito, and just a superhuman act of gentleness toward the natural world that has stuck with me as well. So I really like both of those little anecdotes.
So I was, a couple of years ago, my sister and I were going through some family papers, as I mentioned. And one of the things that we dug up was a speech that Marty gave to the graduating class, 1974 Jackson Hole High School. And is Mike Brennan here? Anyway, he was the valedictorian, and he had the assignment, go find a speaker. And he was a family friend with Marty and convinced her to come. So in that spring, she was out in Seattle and consulted with my sister and myself about the speech. And I didn't realize till I read it, because I never heard the speech. I wasn't here for it. But here's an excerpt, and she actually references our conversation. So she's speaking to the graduating class. You're going to be decision makers, but don't be afraid to get in there. It will be a big adventure. Bring to it what my seagoing father called that divine thing, enthusiasm, and that other life-giving quality, curiosity. Curiosity can keep us going when all else fails. Think of it this way: if you ever get so low it seems life has no meaning, nothing is worth the struggle, you feel cynical about people, you have no faith, then think. Give yourself the adventure of doing what you can with what you have. Even if you have nothing but the adventure of trying, how much better than standing in a corner with your face to the wall? Your class committee, who came to talk to me about commencement, said, tell us what you really think. So I say, get into it. You'll be happier, no matter what your job or career is, if you take part in what's happening in your community, in your state, in the nation. Get into politics. And then she refers to this conversation she had with me. I said to this one 18-year-old this winter, do you ever think about going into politics? Keep in mind, this is the year of Watergate. He said, no, not now, the way it is so corrupt. And then she said, yes, and always will be unless some of you get into it. So don't be afraid. It takes courage. Just ask John Turner. But it's exciting, rewarding, satisfying, sometimes and fun. And politics needs you. So that was a big influence on me because I told her, it's too corrupt. I won't get into it. But I think her influence stuck with me and I did get into it.
Okay, so the next question I want to ask, it says, what would Jackson Hole look like today if the Muries hadn't come here? So obviously, we're very happy they did, but in a little dystopia, what do you think it would be?
Well, okay. You know, obviously Jackson in my 36 years has changed. But there are some key things that are here because of the Muries, like the expanded Grand Teton National Park, like the National Elk Refuge, like the wild lands that we still protect, you know? And the Muries were really, really key players in that piece. And the other thing I think about is, and I know Marty was a big piece of this, you know, the Teton Science School, which I think, you know, it got going in 67, but I can't remember exactly what year. But it would have been in the 70s sometime. It started the 5th grade program. And that was when every 5th grader in town came to Teton Science School for 2.5 days. And I swear, you know, I think that's had a huge impact on this town. Because I'm sure if I talk to people living out here in the audience, like you, like you, there are a lot of people in this audience who have been here a while who went to the 5th grade program. And I know Marty was a part of getting that going. So when you instill that in the mind of 5th graders, you know, they don't forget, and they influence their parents, etc. So I think we have a high level of conservation awareness in this town. I really do. And I think that a lot of us have and a conservation ethic. Like it's really a deep part of our values here. And I really see the Muries influence as part of that. And despite all the craziness that's come into this town, there is a core of people in this town with deep, deep conservation roots. And that to me keeps me here. And, you know, I do attribute it to the influence of the Muries.
Well, I'm not really sure to answer the question, and I think the town and the Teton National Park would be poor without them being here and all the influence that they have on people and still have on people.
I think the thing that speaks to me the most is we wouldn't have the Murie Ranch. And it might still be the STS Dude Ranch, and we would not say that that's bad, but say we'd be really missing a lot because the Murie Ranch is a special place.
I think what I think about is, and I want to say again, Nancy, you were one of the first people to bring this to my attention. You talked about how the Muries were not self-aggrandizing people. There's no peaks really named after them. You largely could just drive from here to Grand Teton, and most people just go down a dusty road and say, "Where am I?" And we tell them, "Well, you're at the Murie Ranch." And then we go on to tell the story. But I say that because they were people that cared about what you were doing. They did so much and had so many things that they could tell you about. But what they ultimately cared about was to identify what you are doing to do things that you care about. And as we tell people every day, it doesn't have to be 100 million acres in Alaska. It can be a tree or a garden plot, or it can be a city park in some place that you call home. And I think just hearing about the conversations and the relationships that Marty had with so many people, the multiplier effect of that I think has rippled all throughout this town and this country.
As a very new person to Jackson, I don't think I can answer the question directly, but I can just say that after spending a few years researching the Muries, and spending a lot of time with their memoirs, their words, it was a really powerful and emotional experience for me to get to come out here for the first time last year. And the first time I walked into the Murie Ranch, it was very impactful and very moving. And so I feel like I'm very much discovering the legacy and the broader impact in this region, and I'm excited to do so. It's been really great.
Yeah, I think Nancy captured a lot of the things that the Muries represented in this valley. If you watch the Ken Burns series on the national parks, there's actually a reference in there to their role in creating Grand Teton National Park. And imagine this valley without that. When my folks first came here, it was Jenny Lake was just this commercial zone. When I was a kid, there were billboards everywhere, and that conservation ethic has really taken hold. I remember though that she would still be fighting the battle. They would still be fighting the battle when the jets would go over. When Marty would be out on her front porch, every time a jet went over, she'd just shake her head and say that airport doesn't belong in a national park. That's why Arn's father, for years and years, never used the airport. There was also the reference that this is a small area relative to their influence in Alaska. Their influence in Alaska is still, I mean, and if Marty was still alive, and Olis and Aid and Wheezy, they would just be at the forefront guarding against what is going on. And they would still be trying to influence young people like they did in 1974. Get into it. That's what I think they would still be saying, is don't give up. And it's going to take the village. Yeah, they had huge influence. I think a lot of people say in this valley, what would Marty and Olis think when they're thinking about something, the Moose Wilson Road or whatever the issue is. And I think that has really impacted this valley.
All right, so I've got one question to wrap up our evening. How do you think the Murie Ranch or yourself carry on the work of the Muries? And maybe this is a little inspiration for us as we end our evening.
So, the Murie Ranch brings a lot of people. And what I feel glad about is that, because I remember Marty saying, please, well, actually it was Joanne, her daughter, but via Marty, we don't want velvet ropes. When you do this Murie Center thing, they were a little uneasy with Murie anything. But, kind of convinced them that, it's okay to call it the Murie Center, Murie Ranch. But please don't do velvet ropes. We do not want you to aggrandize us. This is not about us. This is not what this thing's about. This thing's about protecting wild places, protecting wilderness, protecting nature. So, I think that's really the legacy of the Muries, is that, that's what I put in my brain. Like, what can I do to protect? Because, a lot of our culture has sort of forgotten about that, or, we've kind of created this really interesting little human bubble, and we kind of live in our little human bubble. And not here so much, but, in other places. And so, I feel like that's the legacy of the Muries, is just to keep reminding ourselves we have the quote unquote more than human world is just as important, just as vital as the human world. And I know that's probably a little on the radical side, but I think that it would be really of import to the human population to really get that. that's how this, we are a planet, you know, we are connected. We are all connected. And we can try to pretend like we can live without that, but it's not gonna happen. So anyway, I'm on my soapbox now. But what an influence, that conservation ethic has had.
Well, when we give our tours to many people from many places in America and the world, people cry. They have tears rolling down their cheeks because they thought, why don't I know this? You know? I never heard of this. And it's just so moving that they will just cry, men and women.
Well, to tail off of what Janet just said, most of the people that come in our office say, well, we had this national park app that brought us down here, but I don't really know what goes on here. I've heard the Muries were conservationists. We have large groups sometime from people from National Geographic or talk tours, and we'll have large groups. And I'll ask the question at the beginning of presentation, how many of you know anything about the Muries? And virtually without exception, people say nothing. And I never will forget, one afternoon, we finished up a tour, and as we had finished John Denver's song playing, a gentleman walked out and he had tears running down his cheek, and he said, I am 74 years old, and I am ashamed of the fact that I have never heard of this place and never heard of the Muries. But he said, it has changed me.
Well, I have too much to add. I really just, I guess, I go back to this idea of relationships. And I guess just thinking about at least my generation and how divisive things can be. We're polarized, I guess. And that it really just genuinely, I guess, working at the branch, it seems like people come from all walks of life and come down that road. And I think to really honor Marty and Olaf, as far as I know, she was open to any conversation. And she felt that anybody that showed up here, it was my duty, it was my responsibility to ask them what they're up to and to learn about their life and to specifically listen and provide space to do so. And then most importantly, to identify, what are the things that they care about. And I always share with the fifth graders or that caring is cool. And I think there's no better place that brings awareness to that and sheds light on that than the story of the Muries and the Murie Ranch itself.
Something that really struck me in, getting to know the Muries through their own words and through the speeches that they gave was how, and I might have mentioned this earlier, but how they brought their whole selves to the work that they did, and how they made so much space for their hearts and their feelings about the natural world in their work. And so just that idea of bringing your sort of, intellectual self, but also your emotional self to the work that you do, and speaking from both of those places, speaking from all of you is something that's resonated with me a lot. And, just thinking about Marty's dedication to inspiring the next generation. I'm really excited to get to share their story with more kids and hopefully, it'll inspire some of them the same way it's inspired me, and maybe some of them will, grow up and get into it, right? Get into politics, get into some of these, but at least, whatever they're interested in, have that idea that, pursue something you're really passionate about, do it with your whole heart, and really, be brave enough to try to make a change in the world in that way. So.
Yeah, when you think about what they dealt with for their lifetime, there's the painting on the left over there is the one of Olis's finer pieces, and it's the most valuable thing I think that my wife and I own. Marty gave that to us on our wedding, and it's on the cover of his book of watercolors. And you think back from that was done on their honeymoon in 1923, I think, 24. And they worked on getting the Wilderness Act passed in 1964. And here we are 60 years later, and we're still fighting similar battles. And there's just kind of a stick to it, kind of ethos that they had. And one of the things that Marty talked about a lot was you have to work across the aisle. You can disagree, but don't be disagreeable. You can have the debate, but find common ground. And she found common ground, and she worked across the aisle. And that's what we need in our community and in our country and our world today more than ever. But I think the thing that they really speak to is that don't give up. There's lulls and there's peaks, but the arc that we talk about towards good, it keeps happening if we put energy into it. So we shouldn't be in despair, and we need to transmit that to the next generation. So hopefully that influence will live on, which is why the Murie Center and TSS is so important.
I want to give a thank you to our panelists tonight for your time and your sharing. We've got one more event here at the museum in our summer season. That's Pallets and Pallets. It's on the eve of Old Bill, so September 6th. We're here 5 to 8. If you'd like to come by, we'd love to have another excuse to be on your radar. Otherwise, if you will please, in the name of the Muries, recycle those beers and have a great rest of your night. Oh yes, please, hold on, Sam's got one last thing.
Just do want to share, I would say on behalf of the science schools, if this is okay. We will be launching basically a series of events this fall to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Wilderness app. So I just wanted to mention that and ask you all to please stay tuned and come up to the branch any day of the week. But please do stay tuned for some events coming up this fall. So.
And get home safe, that's all.